Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. A big outcome of COVID was the upending of the media industry. Across sectors, whether it was print, TV, or even digital, there were swaths of layoffs for journalists and, of course, support staff. What's the future of the media industry and how important is an independent media in a democracy, especially to ensure free and unbiased reportage? Are there actually ramifications for the larger social structure? And what's the best way to ensure that media outlets remain that way? Joining me now to talk about that is Professor Julia Cagé. She's written numerous books on the subject and has a keen sense of what's been happening with media trends worldwide. She is, of course, Assistant Professor of Economics in the Department of Economics at Sciences Po Paris. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining in. I've been reading so much of your work, and so many of your lines are sort of coming back and hitting us all over again. Much harder, I think, for the world of journalism generally. You wrote earlier that there've never been as many information producers as there are today. Paradoxically, the media has never been in worse shape. I think you wrote this way back in 2016, but it seems prescient because it's something that the media industry is living in full force at this point. How much of this do you think is a post-COVID world outcome, and how much of it do you think was just coming? It was just a matter of time.
I think a lot of it was just coming. Actually, I wrote the book first in 2014. It was published in 2015 in French and in 2016 in English. And what was funny, between quotes, that when I published this book called Saving the Media, a lot of people were telling me, oh, but we don't need to save the media. There is kind of a crisis that is linked to the entry of the internet and the competition of like a new players like Google and Facebook, whatever. But this would be a short-term crisis. And I remember very well that I came to India, and I had a debate in India about the book. And people were telling me, at least in India, we are doing pretty well, and the media are in good shape. It's not like in the US or in Europe. So what you are seeing is kind of like completely driven by your like Western view of the media industry. And I guess what I am seeing in the book was already the case like in Western countries in 2015, 16, and it's actually what also we see as of today in India. I'm telling you that a lot of it was coming just because part of the crisis is really linked to the collapse in advertising revenues, and the collapse in advertising revenues for the media is not something new. It's linked to two things. The first thing is kind of basic econ 101, supply and demand. When you have much more supply, and in this case it's like supply of like advertising spaces, even if you have kind of growing demand, the price is going to tend towards zero. And this is what we observe is with the internet, first with TV and now with the internet, like everybody is offering like advertising space, and so the price of advertising is just like collapsing. This is the first thing. And the second thing that was less expected, but that we see in the data, and I'm afraid it won't change, is that all the advertising revenues online, they do exist, but they are captured by a very small number of firms like Google and Facebook. So even the newspapers or the TV or the pure online media that want to rely on advertising online, they cannot really make money online, because you have Google and Facebook and like a small number of players that are like basically capturing the entire online advertising market.
I want to come back to a lot of what you said, but it's early days yet. But have you been able to sort of get a sense of whether the method of information dissemination has changed in this COVID era? Has anything changed in the models themselves because of this sort of huge, very global, very colossal event?
So it's kind of complicated. Obviously, if we consider the COVID crisis, we face a change. Are you still there?
Yes,
do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because you are frozen on my screen. If we consider the crisis, obviously there were kind of a change in terms of media coverage because for a couple of months, all the media just talked about one single event, and it was as if nothing else was happening in the world, which was not the case. And what happened, and what was kind of strange, and this is kind of a big paradox for the industry, is that we saw an increase in the interest for news with people like that were more willing to consume information and even like to subscribe to websites. And at the same time, we saw like a huge crisis for the media industry because too many media outlets were depending on advertising revenues, and these advertising revenues collapsed even more with the crisis.
What are your views, Professor, of how things might go from here on for a country like India? As you said, things have moved with a slightly slower pace, something that you saw already happening in perhaps Western markets happened with a delay in the Indian market. What do you see happening over the next couple of years for the media landscape?
It depends. You have a number of different scenarios, and in fact, it will depend on whether or not we are ready to change things. If there is nothing that is going to be done, like no change in regulation, I'm afraid that there will be like again a huge media crisis. It will become super cheap to buy media on the media market. So you will have again a number of like billionaires buying even more media, not to make money out of them, but to get power out of them. In India, it's a particular case because like if you take a country like France or the US, you have a lot of billionaires that buy media in order to have like more political power. If you take India, you also have politicians that own media, so it's even more efficient. You already have your like way to communicate with the people, and I'm kind of afraid that this may become even worse because it will become super cheap to buy media in this time of crisis. So this is one scenario, and then you have like alternative scenarios, but that suppose that politicians will be willing to change the media landscape. So one of the things, for example, that I'm really pushing for is like first more media regulation with like a new way to think about like the extent of media competition. I think we need more media competition than what we see today. And second is non-profit media outlets, something that I've called non-profit media organizations, but that encompass two things. First, like non-profit, so you publish information, you produce information as a public good. And the second thing is that I want a democratic ownership of the media, like more democratic like governance of the media with both the journalists and the readers that are part of the board of the media.
Mm-hmm. You write also in one of your pieces, Professor, that news organizations should be granted a favorable legal and tax status in recognition of their contribution to democracy that's possibly been enjoyed by other parts of the knowledge economy. A, do you see that happening? And B, do you see that as something that governments would be willing to do when in fact it seems like the aim of governments has been to clamp down on media more and more, to make it more difficult to actually go out and do honest reportage?
So, of course, if people, citizens, don't ask government for change in terms of how we regulate media marketing, I think it's going to happen. I wrote in 2015-16, Saving the Media, my new book that was published in France in 2018, that just went out in English during the lockdown, so it was bad timing for publishing a book in English, but that's life. It's called The Price of Democracy. The goal of The Price of Democracy is to say that we need to regulate much more campaign finance, and in particular how money people are allowed to give to campaigns and to political parties. And I think this is exactly the same thing for the media and for the regulation of campaign finance. Obviously, if there is no popular pressure, if people don't ask the representative to have like non-profit media organization with like less concentration, or to have like lower threshold in terms of campaign finance, nothing is going to happen. But once you are in power, it means that you are in power in part thanks to the media landscape, thanks to the money you receive for your campaign. And if you want to be re-elected, you have no incentive to change the media landscape. But I think if the people ask for that, and if they realize that there is something that can be done, and there are some like alternative model, then something may happen. And this is why, as an economist, I do think that this is very important to write books for a general audience. My books are non-technical because I want people to realize that there is a number of issues with media capture today, that there is also some number of issues as of today with campaign finance, and that we need to change regulation if we want like a better functioning democracy.
In India, Professor, aside from there being very large media organizations, as you said, either owned by business, business enterprises, or often owned by politicians, the other problem is the role that social media platforms have played. Platforms like Facebook, certainly platforms like WhatsApp, where disinformation has been an extremely potent and extremely harmful tool. How does that mix into the scenario for the media industry at this point?
We also need to regulate social media. WhatsApp has improved marginally, in particular because of what happened in India and then what happened in Brazil for different reasons. But in both cases, there was the issue of the propagation of fake news, first in India and in Brazil through WhatsApp. So basically, they have reduced the size of the WhatsApp group to avoid that fake news are going to propagate way too quickly. As of today, there is a big issue, and I think there are two issues. The first one is that even if you look at social media, the industry is hugely concentrated. You are talking about WhatsApp and Facebook, but at the end of the day, this is the same group. So this is not as if there were a lot of competition. This is the same enterprise, which has way too many power. This is one part of the problem. The second part of the problem is that basically these platforms, these social media, from a legal point of view, as of today, are not responsible for what is published. And this is not our responsibility, this is the responsibility of the people who published on the platform. So they claim that they do try to regulate fake news, whatever, but at the end of the day, we see clearly that what they're doing is not sufficient. And obviously, we need first to regulate the media industry to guarantee the provision of high quality information, but we also need to regulate social media because you can produce a very high quality information if on social media you only have like the propagation of fake news, and if people consume media outlets through social media, then we will still be in a problematic situation.
What is the perception of Indian media at this point, Professor, when you look at it from the outside? Because we have, as you said, many TV channels. We've got a lot of newspaper publications. The online space has started surging now, but a large swath of the media is seen as extremely tilted to one direction, not quite unbiased in their reportage. How does that affect the perception of India when you look at it as an economist from the outside?
So I'm not a specialist of the Indian media landscape, even if I have to say I'm working on it now. So I'm working on this landscape with a couple of colleagues, in particular Guillaume Casson and Francesca Jansen-Mus. So we are trying to collect data on the Indian media landscape, and we have done so for the past 2 or 3 years. It's kind of like a lot of work because obviously India is a very large country with a lot of local media, in particular a lot of local newspapers. And there were kind of a number of striking findings. I think if I were to look at these industries in comparison to what is happening in countries that I know better, I would say that I see two main weaknesses, three perhaps. One big weakness is that in particular Indian newspapers, but also TV channels are relying a lot on advertising as a share of their total revenues. Even more that what is the case in a number of Western democracies. If you look at the US, since the past 10 years, they have kind of tried to change this equilibria. So for example, as of today, the New York Times relies for less than half of its revenues on advertising. This is not the case of a large majority of Indian newspapers. And when we see crises such that the one of the coronavirus, you really see that this make all these newspapers super fragile in a sense. So this is the first thing. The second step, it's kind of problematic, according to me, in the Indian media market. And this is not specific to India, but this is super strong in India, is a very large reliance on advertising coming from government. Government advertising play a huge role in the financing of the media. And, you know, I got some data. I will have an article at some point, but we do see changes in government advertising given to different media outlets when we have change in government. So it means that it may be that there are like at least some like political bias behind the allocation of government advertising. And obviously this is problematic because if as the media you rely on government advertising just to survive, it means that you may not be willing to be critical towards the government. And the last point, you know, like it's back to the issue of like media independence. There is no perfect media landscape as of today. I think in like all the countries we should do much more. In particular, we should do much more to ensure more pluralism, competition. Also to be sure that you cannot be a firm making some money with the government and on the media. You cannot own too many media. I do think that we need to introduce regulation. Either you own the media or you do politics. And such regulations do not exist. They do not exist in France, to be totally honest. But in France, we only have like some like examples of people who are MPs and on the media, which is not good at all. This should be forbidden. In India, we see that at a much larger scale, and I think this is also very problematic. How can you own the media and then part of assembly who is going to regulate the telecommunication industry? This is not democracy, and this is why we need to introduce rules.
What's also happened along with the COVID, Professor, is that we're seeing extremely large social resistances and protests worldwide, especially around the issue of racism. Would you say on that you are beginning to see a more evolved or a more vocal media, or do you think that still remains work in progress?
Can you repeat the question?
My question was that along with COVID, what we've seen in the last couple of weeks is very large social protests and demonstrations against the issue of racism, and it's happening, you know, across the world. Do you see the media taking a more, stronger role and being at the forefront, or do you think they're still trying to work their way out here?
I think the media here should play a very important role. They should cover this protest. They should support this protest. They should also ensure that all the images that are broadcasted are not fake news. So like double check the veracity of the images. I think here like the social media played a very important role. And not only I'm talking about social media, but like these new technologies. The fact that now we can have a phone, and if I have a phone and I'm in the street and I see some police violence, I can just record that. I put that on like Twitter or Facebook, and then now there is much less impunity thanks to these like new technologies, and this is a good thing. And I really think that yes, the media should cover this protest. And I think this is an important time when I see the protests in the US, but now there are protests in France, because in France we also have issues of racism and discrimination, and there are also like protests in the UK and in Spain. I don't know what is happening in India with respect to this topic right now. This is a very important time, and like the media have an important role to play here.
My final question, Professor, you know, in India over the years, there's been a big debate about who survives, the challenging times from media the worst. I mean, people keep calling for the end of print journalism. Then they say it's time for television to end, then digital to take over. Now television has actually done pretty okay through the COVID times. Do you have a sense of whether there's one stream of media that's coming out stronger than the other?
Now, for me, and this is an important point, and this was at the core of studying the media. For me, what is key is to produce information. At the end of the day, I don't care whether I'm going to read this information on like a print newspaper whether I'm going to read this information on the website of a newspaper, whether I'm going to consume information on the pure online media, whether I'm going to spend time. I don't spend too much time on TV, but I can watch a lot of like TV on the internet. At the end of the day, what we should fight for is independent newsrooms and independent journalists. Then you know how we are going to consume this news. It can also be through radio. Radio is doing much better than everything everyone would have predicted, in particular with the podcast today. So what is really important is the quality of the information that is produced. So as you know, it's a matter of like technology, and it's nice to have different technologies. And perhaps my parents or grandparents, they enjoy like different technologies that I do, and my students will enjoy even like different technologies. But what we should fight all the time is really for high quality information produced by independent newsroom and a lot of pluralism.
Fantastic points, Professor. Thank you so much for joining in today with all your thoughts. I agree completely. Independent newsrooms are the need of the hour. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks.